Hi, I'm back again for my third podcast, and my daughter's just taking the dogs out for a walk. In my first two, I kind of briefly, generally discussed politics, and in particular, American politics. And I was telling you a story about my last podcast, telling you a story about a family that I met when my daughter and I went skiing, and how they kept swearing at the little girl, which is kind of upsetting to me. But I know that everybody uses the F word all the time. But I don't know. For young children, I don't think it's acceptable, really. And if there is a different way to teach your children how to, use language properly when they're upset or frustrated about things like that. But I also want to discuss raising children today. I remember distinctly, my daughters are like 33 and 37, but I distinctly remember things, key things that happened in their childhood. For example, when my youngest daughter was about 4, I'd taken her to the library, and it wasn't very busy that day. And there's a woman there with her little boy about the same age as my daughter, and he was playing with a large wooden train set they had set up in the boys and girls department. And I walked in. My daughter was kind of quiet and easygoing and that. And as soon as she went over, she started touching the train set. And the little boy didn't react, but his mother just reacted so badly. Like, my son was here first. He should be allowed to play with this. She didn't ask permission. Like, she can play with another toy. There are lots of toys here. Why did she, why is she touching this train when my son was here first? And I was in shock. I was in such shock, I didn't even reply. I just gently took my daughter away, and she was happy to, play with something else. But I thought about this afterwards, and I seriously believe that with a mother's behavior like that, reacting that badly, that her son was going to grow up to be a real handful, And so I don't think she should have said anything. Her son wasn't even upset. She was upset and he wasn't, so that's kind of, peculiar. And in retrospect, I just wish I'd said to her, calm down. They can share. It's not his personal toy. But I said nothing. I kind of regret that to this day. And another thing I witnessed, a young mother was in the mall, and it wasn't very busy. There wasn't a lot of people there. And I heard this child, couldn't see them, but I heard the child screaming and crying. And I didn't know what was going on. And then I finally saw this woman come around the corner with this young boy who's about 5. And I said to her, I says, "Oh, what's wrong with your son? What's wrong with your son?" She said, "I bought him new shoes for school. He's not allowed to wear them until he starts school," because this was in late August. And she said, "He's upset because I won't let him put his shoes on." And I'm thinking, to myself, like, really? It was a nice sunny day out, no mud, no snow, of course, in August. And I'm thinking, like, why couldn't she have let him wear those shoes home? The kid was hysterical practically. And I'm thinking, like, what difference would it make? His shoes are going to get dirty anyway. Just let him wear them home from the store that day. And again, I thought that was a terrible, terrible way to, to treat a child. Some parents treat their children so badly that if we treated those adults, those parents, as badly as they treat their kids, I think there could be, some charges or something for harassment. But it is what it is. And I'll tell you about another time when my children were young, that when my daughter started grade 1. Well, my oldest daughter was finished grade 1, so she was in grade 6, I guess, and my youngest daughter just started grade 1, had the same teacher that her sister had. Now, my daughters are very different, so nothing really seemed to bother my oldest daughter. For example, I had, what's that really bad cough medicine? Anyway, I said to her, I says, this is really, really going to taste bad, right? And I gave her a spoonful, and she just kind of like, made a face. She goes, I love it. Which, of course, it was really terrible tasting, but she would admit how bad it tasted. That was her. Now, when the youngest daughter started grade 1 with this teacher, this teacher had a really bad reputation at the school for hollering at all the kids. Well, she's close to retirement. I don't know if that affected her. I don't know what was going on with her personal life, but I suspect it was because she's retiring. And, when you get closer to, your job ending, you don't really care as much, I guess, in some cases. So, anyway, my daughter, she'd gone to junior kindergarten, and now she's in grade 1 with this terrible teacher. And one day my daughter was just laid on the bed crying. She didn't want to go to school. So when I asked her what was wrong, she goes, well, my teacher's always yelling at me. So, of course, I was really upset, and this was a common occurrence, not like once in a blue moon. So I decided to make an appointment with the teacher. I was going to go over and tell her off, like, please don't treat my daughter this way. It's not necessary to scream at her, right? She's like 5 years old. So luckily, I met another mom when I was out in the school, when I was on my way to talk to my daughter's teacher. And she gave me the best advice I ever had. She said to me, well, you can't go in there and accuse her of yelling at your daughter. She yells at all the kids. And, she went and some other parents complained to her. And then she said, well, he needs to be yelled at. And she continued to yell at this kid. And the parents went for a parent-teacher interview. She talked to her for 5 minutes. Just okay, time to leave. Just, put them off. So she said, well, don't accuse her of yelling at your daughter. Just ask her, like why she thinks your daughter's behaving this way. Like, she'll get the message, right? Subtly, she'll get the message. So I went and I sat with the teacher. I said, my daughter, she loved junior kindergarten, loved senior kindergarten, loved coming to school like every day. And now she cries every day. She doesn't want to come to school. I says, I don't get it. Like, is she being bullied? I don't know what's going on, but she's, really upset every morning. And you know what, after that? The teacher just kind of like, oh, well, like, I'll keep an eye on her, whatever. After that, the yelling really, really almost stopped. And my daughter was happier to go to school. So, when you have these issues with your children, sometimes it just pays to use psychology instead of accusing people of doing something wrong, even though you didn't know that they did something wrong. Just, use psychology, and it worked perfectly. And I was so happy about that. So I think we have to be advocates for children, obviously. They don't have the communication skills or the maturity to deal with, adults that we have or should have. So I just want to say, watch your children, help your children, support your children every way you can. My daughter even talked me into, I was a stay-at-home mom. My daughter talked me into volunteering at the library, so I go over to her school all the time and help in the library. And my other daughter got me to participate in her book sale. I went down to the school and sat in the library to participate in the book sale for her. And, I took them all summer. I took them to Vacation Bible School. I had a car, I was a stay-at-home mom. So they would advertise it back then. This is before, computers and cell phones. It would have been like in the late 90s, I guess, or mid 90s. Every summer, they'd advertise these things like for free Vacation Bible School, which had activities, songs, snacks, games. And you don't have to be particularly religious, and you don't even have to belong to the church. It was a free, event for children. And so I would check the paper every week, and every week they're going to a different church. One time they went to a church, and I think the majority of the children were Oriental, but my children were young. They didn't really care, but they really enjoyed these times. And again, you don't have to be particularly religious. They're not trying to, force you to come into church, or you don't have to donate any money. It's a really wholesome, fun activity for children. And then, of course, your swim lessons and dance lessons. They joined, my daughters had no brothers, and then Cubs and Scouts have become, they allowed girls to participate in Cubs and Scouts. So because my daughters had no brothers, I put them in Cubs and Scouts so they'd feel more comfortable around young boys. They wouldn't feel intimidated or frightened. And they really enjoyed that, really enjoyed that activity. And then there was Awana, which is another Bible-based activity one evening per week. And again, they weren't trying to force you to be religious or believe in their God or anything, but it was a really fun, free activity for my children. So Vacation Bible School, Cubs and Scouts, or I don't know if they still have Brownies and Girl Guides, that's another activity. Um, you know, tobogganing, skating, you can go down to Williams and skate for free. And so there's just so many things you can do with your children if you're on a budget and you want to spend a lot of money. This is a, good outlet for children, right? Keep them busy, but not too busy. I mean, they still did their studies, of course, because that was a priority. I mean, some children get so busy with their activities, they don't have time for school, and their schoolwork suffers. So, oh gosh, and my daughters, when they were in grade 1 or 2, they used to bring home these simple little reading books. They only had about like 8 pages, like one sentence per page, and they're just learning to read. And I would sit with them. It wasn't really fun, but I would sit with them every night and help them sound out the letters and the words until we, completed this book. And like an 8-sentence book could take us like 15 or 20 minutes. For me, it was torture, but it helped them learn and, to learn to enjoy reading. Spelling words too. I mean, I would make them write their words out like 10 times each. They always pass their spelling tests. When I was young, my mom didn't really monitor our homework. She didn't really care if we were doing. I would get all C's on my report card, maybe a couple of B's if I was lucky. But again, I'm thinking like all these kids that do so well on spelling tests, they must be really smart. Well, I don't think it was that they were smart. It was just that if you do your homework, write the words out, it's repetitive, that's how you learn. So again, and then also too, my daughter was kind of, when she was young, she kind of struggled with math and spelling, I guess, or reading. So I sent them to Kumon, which is a less expensive version than the Oxford, Training Center. There's high-priced, tutors that you can get for your children, whereas like the Kumon was very inexpensive, and it was repetitive. And I took her there, a couple of nights a week. And piano lessons. Piano is supposed to help you with learning, like help your mind develop to learn new skills better. They took piano lessons for a while. They didn't keep up with it, but they enjoyed it at the time, and it wasn't too expensive. Although I don't know what the prices be like now, because this is going back like to the 90s, And so these are things that you can do with your children. And raising children, isn't the easiest thing. Some children were difficult than others. I also used to babysit this young boy and girl after my kids, started high school. And I noticed it was a boy and girl. So the boy would have been about 5 and his sister was like 3. So if the girl chose the program, which would be like Powder Puff Girls and, Rainbow Bright or whatever, and they would sit quietly. It was the middle of winter, I couldn't take them outside, so they would sit quietly and watch his cartoons. But when the boy picked the program, he was picking like all these fighting cartoons, right? Transformers was one. I can't remember the names of the other ones, but I found, honestly, like when they would watch the fighting cartoons, this young boy would get up and start jumping on the couch and like pretending he had a sword and fighting with his sister and pushing his sister around, whereas it's never happened when they watch the girly cartoons. So again, you have to be aware of what your children are watching and what it's teaching them, right? So but I wonder, having children is a lifelong commitment. You start to worry from the moment of conception. You're going to start to worry, like, is the baby growing fast enough? Like, you have to have these tests. You have to watch your diet. You can't drink. You can't smoke. And this baby kicking, is it growing fast enough? Is it, is there going to be any issues when they're born, right? So right from the moment of conception, you start to worry. And then after that, you're still worried. You worry about their health and their growth and their diet. When my daughter was an infant, I was over 30. I should have known better. I don't know why nobody told me this, but she would sleep a lot. And I thought, well, that's good. She's quiet. She's growing. She can sleep, right? And I was feeding her with the boob, and And I thought she was fine. They took her to the doctor when she was a couple months old, and they weighed her in different rooms. They took her and says, well, we're going to weigh her again. We got to check her weight. We got to check her weight. And then they told me, well, first of all, she lost a pound in the hospital. And they said, well, she's kind of a big, healthy baby. Like, don't worry about it. And I remember the woman in the next bed was always picking up her son and feeding him. And I'm thinking, just let the baby sleep. Like, it's quiet. Like, why are you pulling him out to feed him, right? He'll cry when he's hungry. But anyway, so later on when I took my daughter to the doctor, what I wasn't aware of is that the reason she had lost weight is because although I was feeding her, I didn't think about, and again, this is probably common sense, it's kind of dumb on my part, because I already had a daughter that was fine. So she wasn't having the wet diapers. I didn't know how much she was feeding because I didn't pump. So I had no idea. I thought if she's on the boob for long enough, she is getting what she needs to thrive. And lo and behold, she lost like over a pound or something. And of course, right away, then I changed her to formula. Now, you've got to watch these things. You know, my mom had 5 kids. You know, a lot of my friends had children. Nobody said to me, well, you know, gee, if she's not wetting her diaper a lot, then there's got to be an issue with what she's getting to drink, right? How much milk she's getting to drink. So again, that's something you learn when you get older and read things about what to expect when you're expecting. And so so like I say, and then my daughter too also had allergies. And what I didn't think of at the time, which again, like doctors, I took her to the doctor like for regular visits. What I should have done, what the smart mother would do, is introduce one food at a time to your child. I would sell this baby food on sale and just buy everything on the shelf, give her a variety, not thinking that, you know, she could be allergic to some of this food, right? Some of these ingredients. Well, sure enough, she had bouts of asthma when she was small. She's kind of grown out of that, but she is got a severe allergy to tree nuts. So again, I'm thinking tree nuts, anything with nuts, you know, any nut you can name, including peanuts. Well, I just found out, I don't know how many years ago, that a peanut is not a tree nut, and she could eat peanut butter. And all those years I never gave her peanut butter because I thought it would make her, you know, her allergies, you know, flare up. So you've got to be careful what you eat. You've got to be smart about what you feed them. Feed them like one new food at a time per week. And and there's just, and then also 2 playtime. So I had 2 children. So of course, when the youngest one, who was, you know, 5 years younger than her sister, when she started to walk and talk and they'd play together, I pretty much watched them all the time. They never had any serious issues with like falls or playing with knives or forks or anything dangerous, you know, anything electric. I kept them safe, but at the same time they'd be playing with their toys in their room, and then they'd be laughing and they'd get along, and then their laughter would change, and I would just sense, just by the sound of their laughter, that they were going to start fighting. So that's when you have to go and break it up. Try to avoid the fights. Because that's not healthy, you know, especially if it comes to blows. You don't want that to happen. You know, they should be, hopefully, if you've raised your children well, they'll be lifelong friends. So, but again, there's a lot of work raising children. I remember too, when I was in my 20s, that I was working at this nursing home, and this woman said to me, she's walking her 2 young children in the carriage. I guess they were like 1 and 2 or whatever. And she said some old lady approached her and said, like, oh, you're so lucky. Like, what a great time to, you know, have 2 small children. Like, what a great life you must have, you know, with these 2 small children. And this mother thought to herself, like, she's crazy. There's diapers and feedings and laundry and et cetera, and so much stuff too, you know, that goes with, looking after small children. But then she realized that as her children grew, the problems became worse and worse. So it's true what they say, like, small children, small problems, big children, big problems, you know. And especially with, the phones and the internet and all this kind of stuff. There's so many dangers out there. You hear about kids being stalked and just, communicating with pedophiles or whatever and thinking that someone their age. And there's so many dangers out there. So we really have to watch our children. So it's not a part-time job, it's a full-time job, you know. And there's just so many things out there that can hurt your children. You think, yeah, you just don't know what to think because there's bullies at school, there's the internet. I have a nephew who's been, well, actually it's my niece's son, so it's my great nephew, and he just turned 10. Well, because she put an iPad in his hand from the moment he could hold an iPad, now he has issues with his eyes. And it's kind of scary, but his eyes, they call it seizures. I don't know, I thought of seizures when your whole body shakes, but anyway. So constantly on a regular basis, his eyes will just roll up in his head. And he kind of just freezes. He doesn't fall down, or he's not hurt, or, anything like that. I don't know if he'll ever be able to drive a car because you'll be talking to him and his eyes will just involuntarily roll up in the top of his head. And that's disturbing. And if, I'm convinced that this, giving a young child when they're still growing and their brain and everything is developing, to put an iPad in a young child's hands is very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Take your kids outside. They don't have to be tied to their, and then I also have, my niece also has a daughter who just turned 13, and she is constantly looking at her phone. So she doesn't communicate. I mean, she has speech difficulties, severe speech difficulties. You can hardly understand what she says, but, instead of sending her to speech therapy, they send her to dance lessons and hip hop and, and sports and, things that will not aid her speech at all. So, you got to prioritize what your child needs. If they have difficulty speaking, they do need speech therapy. And to ignore it and hope it'll go away is not the key. You can't ignore their problems. There has to be some intervention, and we as their parents have to intervene. So I'm saying that, people have to be careful when they think about having children, what it entails. It's a lifelong obligation, and the worry never, ever stops. So it's a big responsibility. You don't have the freedom. It's expensive. The food, the diapers, the carriage, all the accessories. The little clothes that they only wear for a couple of months. Then they have to get a new size. All of these things are so expensive, and it's taxing. And if you don't have a lot of money, don't make a good wage. You don't have to be rich to have children, but you should have at least have a comfortable, home room for the baby, so it doesn't end up sleeping in the corner of your room. Save your money if you want to have kids, but just realize and treat them kindly. I've seen a lot of parents, hauling their kids around, dragging them by the arm, yelling at them, swearing at them. What kind of life is that? Get yourself a dog if you want something to love. Dogs don't ask for anything except, they need food and water. But so, I think people romanticize having children. They romanticize it in the way that, they think of teddy bears and bedtime stories and, sleeping babies and, little bassinets and little delicate baby clothes and all this sort of thing. And it's more than that. They're not dolls. They're real human beings that need a lot of attention. So, and here's another thing, my daughter too. I didn't want my daughters to suck her thumb. So before she was born, I went and bought a bunch of soothers, all these different colors, so each one would match her different outfits, right? And then I gave them to her, and she'd spit them right out. So me not being aware that if I want her to suck a soother, you have to hold it in their mouth so they're used to it, and then they'll suck it, right? And I've seen people sucking their thumbs when they're 6 or 7, which is really kind of sad. It's probably going to ruin their teeth. I took my daughter when she's in grade 5. I took her to a swim meet, and there's a young boy sitting in the back seat of my car, and he was sucking his thumb. And I said, "Have you got a sore thumb?" No. He wasn't embarrassed. He just kept on sucking his thumb. I thought that's really kind of, not healthy. But so my daughter never got onto the soother, never sucked her thumb. Now the younger daughter, she started sucking her thumb. I didn't like that, so I got some gauze and I wrapped her thumb up. Of course, like new gauze every day, right? Within a couple of weeks, I didn't stop putting gauze on her thumb. Never, ever sucked her thumb again. So they've both got beautiful teeth, like really beautiful teeth. So that's something else you can learn about, raising children. And don't romanticize having children. They grow up. Yeah, they're cute when they're small. They're really cute when they're sleeping, especially. But, there's going to be things, they talk about like, vaccines. Should they get a vaccine? Should they not get a vaccine? Too much screen time is unhealthy. And then there's bullies at school. And then there's kids that want to change their gender, and kids that are spoiled rotten, and then kids that wealthy kids that just think they're entitled to everything, and it's just wrong. It's just wrong. And I mean, Jackie Kennedy Onassis once said, I always remember thinking this. She said, if you bungle raising your children, nothing else matters, and that is true. That is true. If you want the children, you have to be prepared to sacrifice things for them if you love them. Treat them well. Treat them like you want to be treated. Slapping children, hitting children, swearing at children, lifting them up by the arm. I've seen parents lift their child up by one arm. Can you imagine if there was there's a giant and he grabbed my arm to pick me up, dangling by one arm? Do you realize how much that could hurt? That would really hurt. But people think their children are just, I don't know what they think. They just mistreat them and they say, but I love you. But then, it happens again. So, yeah, so be careful with the way you treat your children, Oh, and also, I was in a restaurant about 5 years ago, and with another couple, my husband and another couple, and I saw this man sitting not far away, about 10 feet away. And he had this little boy with him, right? So the kid was about 5. Really, really cute little boy. And they were eating their dinner. They're sitting side by side at this table. And they're eating their meal. And lo and behold, the father was on his cell phone the whole time. And it really kind of got to me, right? He's ignored. So I feel that either they were divorced or the mother was working. I don't know, but it was just this man with a son. So it bothered me so much that I told the people I was with, I says, I know that guy over there, which of course I didn't. And I just went over to him and I sat next to him. I said, I hope you won't feel angry, or, I don't mean to be, I don't want to start a fight. I hope you're not angry. I says, but, I've watched you and your son, sitting here for the last half hour. You haven't said one word to each other. Maybe if you put your phone away and talk to him, that would be really, good thing for him, right? Because the kid was just sitting there just quietly eating, just looking around the restaurant, And I told him that, and I hope that made a difference, because it's sad when you see, parents and children that don't even speak to each other. So, again, please, if you have young children, please treat them well. Beating them, and like I said, beating them and hitting them is not going to teach them, anything positive. Children learn what they live. And if you are, bully your children, they will turn into bullies at school, and that's not a good thing. So those are my lessons on raising children, my opinions, and please read to your children. If you could read a little bit to your children at night, that's a great thing. Children just love books. There's so many books to read, whether you buy them or borrow them from the library. Books are really great, and it really helps them learn, and it gives them one-on-one time with their parent, one-on-one time with the attention of a parent. It's a great thing. So that's another activity you can do with your children that's totally free. So stay tuned. I will be back again this week sometime, and Be well, stay well, and love your children. Bye.